is totally plagued by insider gambling,
I've
match-fixing, abusive wrestling, guiding the world,
such as collusion, which I kept hush-hush in sumo. I scratch your back and you scratch mine. Where some wrestlers would throw a match, they don't
No, yakuza.
who needs them to achieve
The entire thing is just a gambling.
and in turn, if they refine
Well, you can't decide where your bet goes. It does build up
there's a
in your
documentary on
organs.
this.
Freakonomics brought me here.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fanny Packster Massacre. To get this first thing out of the way, a lot of people thought,
Man, you can't control your visceral fat, that's BS.
well, take that up with this video from National Geographic and this video from these guys. Those are going to be down in the description if you want to so badly deny the truth. But on to the main point of today's video. Is sumo rigged? Some people are turned away because of the past history sumo had with match fixing over a decade ago. The fact of the matter is yes, it did exist, and let's go over it together. In February 2011, Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology and National Police Agency announced that an investigation into allegations of baseball gambling by sumo wrestlers and officials had discovered cell phone text messages indicating that some matches had been fixed. Allegedly, 14 wrestlers or stable masters were involved. 3 wrestlers, I'm not going to say those names, reportedly admitted to throwing or fixing bouts. As a result of the independent investigation, the board of directors of the Japan Sumo Association decided in an extraordinary meeting to cancel the March 2011 tournament in Osaka. The last time This Doesn't Matter was canceled, it's been the first time, so it was a big deal, basically. In the end, 23 wrestlers in total were judged guilty of match fixing, and all were expelled. The JSA's investigative panel stated in May 2011 that match fixing appears to have been widespread. The panel stated that it would be difficult to discover, however, the full extent of the problem. Uncovering the problem is made even more difficult by the existence of a separate form of collusion, in Japanese meaning deliberate lack of effort in a sumo bout, which refers to a rikishi going lightly on an opponent without the exchange of money.
In sumo culture especially, individual gain must be subordinated to the rights of the group, meaning that certain wrestlers have appeared duty-bound by their organization's style to help popular or senior wrestlers in need.
The wrestlers not listed above who admitted to match fixing and accepted expulsions are as follows, and then it's a whole list of wrestlers. I looked into these lists of wrestlers, and it seems like most of them were in Juryo or very low Makuchi or even Makushita at times during most of their careers. Now, if a history of match fixing that has since been dealt with turns you away from the sport still, I understand. But wait! Let me just show you some other sports you might want to avoid because they have a history of match fixing as well. American football, Australian football, badminton, baseball, basketball, boxing, cricket, darts, esports, field hockey, golf, handball, motorsport. I don't even know what snooker is. Tennis, volleyball, and references? Who plays? So pretty much everything in the history of the world has had some match fixing in it. And some probably aren't even on this list because nobody's found out yet. They've covered their tracks so well. The only difference with sumo is that the Japanese Sumo Association aired out its dirty laundry for all to see, while match fixing probably still goes on in other sports with, whether it be, I don't know, biased, paid-off refs or boxers taking a fall. But that isn't even the main source of where all these people claim to have known so much about sumo. Long before this scandal in 2011 came to light, 2 nerds wrote a book about the data in sumo wrestling. I looked at the data and it's rampant with cheating, and they called it Freakanomics. They later went on to make a movie about Freakanomics, and here's a clip from Freakanomics of them talking about sumo wrestling. Oh wait, I'm not going to show it to you because I don't want to get copyright striked by those nerds to give them the satisfaction. So instead I reenacted it for you.
You see, corruption is just a tricky thing, right? Because you can't track corruption. Corrupt people try to hide their steps at every given possible scenario. So you can't really classify corruption. That's why murder's great. I love murder. There's a dead body. You know someone was murdered. Murder's great. But with cheating, you got numbers. As an outsider pleb, as yourself, you might ask, well, how do I know if someone's cheating? Well, that's simple. The answer is, it's in the data. I don't have to have seen a single sumo match to tell you with almost complete certainty that it was filled with rampant tasing. Have you guys seen Rick and Morty? Is so great. To be fair, it takes a fairly high IQ.
Rikishi entering a tournament's final 15th match with a 7-7 record has far more to gain from a victory than, let's say, someone with an 8-6 record has to lose. If a wrestler has 8 wins under his belt, he is guaranteed to advance, even if he loses that last match. So he can afford to take a fall. In Japan, there's a term for match tricking, yakuza. Many suspected that sumo matches might be rigged, but it is nearly impossible to prove, unless you look closely at the numbers.
When two wrestlers go head to head and I would expect them to be evenly matched, the one who needs to win wins 75% of the time instead of 50%, which is a huge deviation. I mean, the scientist guy, he turns himself into a pickle. You see, if I, 8-6 guy, go against you, 7-7 guy, I'm gonna let you win, because you're gonna fall down the pyramid, and I'm not.
Whenever the 7-7 person would go up against the 8-6 person, the 7-7 would win nearly 75% of the time. Then, the next time those two sumo wrestlers fought, the 7-7, the one who won, would lose almost every single time. I've never seen a sumo match. I don't watch sports, no.
Going off of that data that Freakanomics provided, I looked at the last 5 years of modern sumo. On the 15th day, every 7-7 matchup. To preface, this took me hours to collect because I did it the old-fashioned way, and no, I don't like Excel. Also, this is going to be very boring to explain, but here we go. On these lists is every 7-7 who went up against someone who had already gotten their Kachikoshi. I separated them with the Juryo and Mikuchi and recorded how many bouts 7-7s had that basho that weren't up against someone who's already gotten their Kachikoshi, at the top with an M for how many in Mikuchi and J for Juryo. The Rikishi's name on the left is always the 7-7er. In front of their names is either an L or a W, indicating whether they've won or lost. It then shows who they were up against in the tournament, what that Rikishi's record is that basho, and then the record against each other up until that point, just to see if our 7-7s were likely to win. After that, I state whether they went on to win or lose their next encounter with them. Okay, now that that's out of the way, you can all go over that and fact check me if you want, but let's see if those freaks' arguments still hold up. I'm going to let you all know I did try to do a different take of this, and it was very boring. I explained every single detail about the math and the percentages. That's all it is. It's just fractions and percentages from the data, which I guess is statistics. But instead of boring you, which I guess some people don't like math, I love math, I'm gonna give you a basic overview and understanding of how I got these percentages and how they make sense and what they mean to what Freakanomics said about all of sumo. Basically, we want to look at just how many bouts in all are on the typical final day of each basho of the last 5 years, since Freakanomics theory is based on the final day. And we want to see how big of a percentage this match fixing makes up of all of sumo. From what I saw, there was anywhere between 18 to 20 bouts on the final day, depending on how many yokozunas are in attendance. So I just took the middleman of this and used 19. 19 times 6, the amount of basho per year, times 5 for the amount of years of data I gathered, gives us about 570 total matches in the last 5 years. We then do the same thing for Juryo, but it's almost always typically 12 matches that are held on the final day, so with that we get 360. Now we might want to look at how many 7-7 matches there are on the final day over the last 5 years, and the only way to do this is to look at my data, which for Mikuchi shows 129 7-7 matches, and for Juryo 102. Seeing this, we see 7-7 matches make up 22% of final day matches over the last 5 years in Mikuchi, and 28% in Juryo. Now, these 7-7 matches have to meet a specific criteria in order for Freakanomics theory to uphold. The 7-7 has to be faced against a Rikishi who has a record of 8 wins, 6 losses, or higher that basho. They have to win against that Rikishi, and then almost always they have to lose their next encounter with that same Rikishi. So, of the 129 7-7 matches in Mikuchi, only 54 of them go against a better scored Rikishi, and only 43 for Juryo. This shows us just how many times the opportunity arises for a Rikishi to throw about for a fellow in need. If we just wanted to see how many times the opportunity arises in just the amount of 7 and 7 matchups, we would see 42% of the time for Mikuchi and 42% of the time for Juryo. But if we wanted to be fair and see how many times this opportunity arises in total matches held, so we can get an idea of just how much it affects the system, we see it's about 9% of all bouts in Mikuchi over the last 5 years and 11.9% of all bouts in Juryo. Of those opportunities that arise, how many of them win? Because remember, they have to beat the better scored Rikishi to meet the match fixing criteria. Well, in Mikuchi, only about 48% win, instead of the 75% like Chiyomaru's claim. But in Juryo, it's actually 74%. So does this mean Juryo is more likely to be rampant with cheating? Well, no, it still has one more criteria to meet, as well as Juryo does have more motivation down there. They're fighting for a lot more. If they lose and get knocked out of Juryo, they have no more salary, and some of them have families to feed. But you wouldn't see Freakanomics take into account things like motivation, because that's not data. So, of those that win, how many go on to lose their next encounter with that same opponent? In Mikuchi, over the last 5 years, the amount of Rikishi who won against an opponent that had already gotten their Kachikoshi, then lost to them the next encounter, is 9. But I'm gonna shave off 2 of those because the other Steven said,
I would expect to have an even match.
And 2 Rikishi who won had a good record against the opponent they were facing, meaning they were likely to win. And due to the law of probability, them losing their next encounter could have happened, leaving 7 matches in the last 5 years that meet the criteria for match fixing in Mikuchi. Now, if I do the same thing for Juryo, it was 11 matches, but one of those 7 and 7s was expected to win, leaving 10 matches in the last 5 years for Juryo that meet the match fixing criteria Freakanomics gave us. Now, to put all of that into perspective, when we look at the percentages, we see that out of all matches held on the final day of the last 5 years, only 1% of them could have been fixed in Mikuchi, and only 2% of matches in Juryo. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem very rampant to me, Stinkonomics. If you're still skeptical after all that and want to observe the 1 or 2% of all bouts in the last 5 years that could have been corrupted, I have them playing in the background over the data from win into loss in order. So you can judge for yourself whether anyone was throwing or if it looks like a totally normal sumo bout. What Freakanomics did was detrimental to the sumo community because they never went back and corrected themselves. They also didn't take into account factors like motivation and human nature because they rather have just exploited it for money and left. When you've already secured your promotion on the final day, whether you like it or not, you're going to feel ever so slightly relieved, which gives the Rikishi who really wants the win an edge. But then again, this doesn't really happen that often. Over half of the time, 7 and 7s are pitted against each other or someone with a lower score. As for being paid to throw a fight, there's no way I or anyone can prove or disprove that in any sport for that matter, without something like bank statements or an audit.
Call the 800 number.
All I can say is that the JSA has been extremely strict since I've been watching sumo. They gave Hakuho a warning for this reaction to having a Zenso Yusho after coming back from knee surgery. They took away all Rikishi social media after Abi and Chiyomaru made a silly Instagram video where Chiyo pretended to be tied up and kidnapped by Abi with masking tape. Rikishi aren't allowed to have girlfriends until they reach salaried divisions. They get banned from sumo altogether for hazing or bullying their stablemates, and aren't allowed to have facial hair or tattoos. This leads me into the conspiracy of them being paid to throw matches because of yakuza involvement. The last update I saw of this was this article from 2010 of the JSA promising to cut any and all ties possible with them. But the only concrete evidence I could find of yakuza involvement in sumo is this guy from Yakuza Way of the Dragon.